It's important, of course, to realize that containers have some benefits. And those benefits can be realized even in a larger scale when we employ DevOps. So if we have a pipeline that is going to deploy your mainline copies, that means our development group is able to deploy CI and CD based workloads in a development structure. So we're going to have basically a workflow where basically we have a CI pipeline, a CD pipeline, and then the goal is to get to what? To continuous deployment, where it is automated. Now, containers provide a lot of great capabilities. First, they are lightweight. In other words, containers, for example, are not like a VM in the sense that, first of all, it has all this additional overhead like deploying an OS. And we remove that with a container. They're reusable, so we could always deploy that container somewhere else. Also, too, it's important to note for interoperability. What is really nice about containers is that I could take my on-prem container, and if it's in Docker, I could move it to the cloud. So if I have 20 containers, and again, hard to see, I could move it over to any cloud provider, basically. It could be AWS, could be Google, whoever it may be. And what's nice is this container will basically have interoperability in most cases immediately. And therefore, there isn't any kind of significant rework to make it work from on-prem to basically the cloud. Now, the power can get even greater when we have like a service mesh. So if we're going to use Istio and we're going to use Kubernetes on-prem and other services, we can really integrate a service bus in a lot of cases, and that provides added value so that we can migrate from on-prem to Google Cloud, for example, or AWS, or vice versa if we need to. Open source containers are generally open source. The most common platform is Docker. And then if we're going to have a management system, we typically would use Kubernetes. And then deployment is also going to be rapid and efficient. Let's talk about the 6 critical steps that enterprises should follow to succeed in their transition to a DevOps model. And this is really from a legacy base, of course. So when it comes to develop and document a corporate vision of how to transition, what I mean is to strategize what you have now and put together a strategy to get to where you want to go. In a lot of cases, as part of that, we need to realize that we want to typically gain, and I'll go back here, some of these benefits that containers provide. And they contain more benefits, of course, but we'll talk about those coming up in a second. But it's important as well to first develop a corporate vision. The next is we need a culture. In other words, if we don't have a culture at our enterprise that is going to work together or is capable of working together between development operations and other departments for that matter, then a DevOps culture will not be fully realized, and therefore you will likely not get the full benefit of migrating legacy to containers because of your enterprise structure for whatever that is, whatever reason that is, I should say. We then would want to consider containerizing our application on a standardized platform. What I mean is we probably want to go to Kubernetes, and that is using Docker container as well. That's really important to realize because when it comes to deploying containers, we want them to be interoperable and portable. That means we can move them from on-prem. So the beauty of containers is that if I create a container in Kubernetes on-prem, I can migrate it to Google Cloud, to AWS, Azure, without really too many restrictions or overhead. We then want to proceed to what is called basically a test and QA environment. So testing, quality assurance, I'm wrapping that up together really. So that means we need to have the tools and the processes together to be able to do that. Now, that means we need to invest basically as part of this in basically areas such as Kubernetes, Docker. It could be also other basically tools, for example, like Terraform. We also could get into infrastructure as code. All of these things really come into play to enable us to get the benefits of a true DevOps environment. One of the other factors we may want to consider, of course, is to look at a continuous deployment system. Basically, we've went from CI to CD, and then we want to get to a point where we could enable automation. When we automate, we're going to remove a lot of the manual tasks that may have been done before. This is going to provide us significant efficiencies. Lastly, the last one for the main top 6 critical steps really is to encourage continuous monitoring. Now, that means we need to identify metrics. For example, we want to identify everything from a service level objective to an agreement, even with our internal users. And the reason is because it provides us something to measure against. For example, uptime, latency, all of these things we can measure by metrics. We also should have a feedback loop. It's really important to understand what people are doing, why they're doing it, but also how do they feel about how you're doing as well.